Everybody, welcome to topic 4 of Unit 1. We're talking here specifically about FIFA and the IOC. So we've done our general look at NGOs, our general look at IGOs, and we're going to look at now a couple of the sporting bingos that particularly play back in and relate closely to what is going on with individual countries and sporting events and how those all sort of tie together. And FIFA and the IOC are certainly the two biggies that we need to be most concerned with throughout the course of this class. It doesn't mean we won't talk about other sporting bingos at all, but these are the two main ones, FIFA and the IOC. So there's bingos and there's bingos, right? We looked at the big international NGOs, and when we did that other lecture, I put up the images of a lot of different ones, like FIBA for basketball and FINA for swimming, etc. So pretty much anything has to have an IF if it wants to be part of the global sporting scene. An IF then again standing for International Federation. So FIFA is the one specifically for soccer. Now the IOC isn't really an IF. It's a bingo, but it's not an IF because it is sort of a overarching entity that oversees the work of lots of IFs that are going to come together in a particular competition in Olympic Games. So you've got the IOC, which is more powerful than any IF except for FIFA. So the IOC, what it does is it dictates what a different sporting federation has to do in order to be able to participate in the Olympics, and they demand that they have the best and the brightest of all the athletes that the world can send. So if you are aspiring to be in the Olympics, as for example golf was recently, then the IOC is not interested in having golf be added unless the Golf Federation promises that they'll send the best golfers to the Olympic Games, right? But they make an exception for FIFA. FIFA, which oversees soccer, is concerned that it will have its World Cup, its property, the World Cup, overshadowed if there's sort of a default second global competition. Like in basketball, they're not really concerned about that. In basketball, the Olympics is more visible than the World Basketball Championship is. So even though those happen on opposite years, so that you'll have an Olympics in 2016, you had World Cup of basketball in 2014, they're not that World Basketball property, the World Cup property for basketball is not seen as more valuable than the Olympics. So they don't have any leverage with the IOC. When the IOC says, you send us the best or we're not letting you be in the Olympics, the Basketball Federation, FIBA, has to listen. FIFA doesn't have to listen. FIFA wants to have soccer in the Olympics because it is high profile, but it's not higher profile than the World Cup. So in a weird relationship, in some senses you'd say the IOC is the most powerful of the sporting organizations because it oversees so much in both winter and summer, which means it has ties back into lots of countries, comes up more often than not. But FIFA actually has more influence over its sport than the IOC does. So FIFA can do things that it wants to do that the IOC doesn't necessarily want it to do. So these are the two big bingos. One's an IF, that's FIFA. One's not an IF, but it is a sporting bingo. And FIFA has all of this power. Now there is a small exception to some of this where there's bingos that are more powerful than others, and what we're talking about there, that would be that in the United States, some of our leagues are more powerful than their federations, right? So the NHL, the National Hockey League, MLB, Major League Baseball, and the NFL, the National Football League, they're more powerful than their federations. So sort of like how FIFA is more powerful than the IOC in some senses, those leagues are more powerful than those IFs. But generally speaking, around the world, everybody, all the other leagues are sort of subservient to the IF. And there may be some changes coming in the future, but for now, that's the case. So there's bingos and there's bingos, and these two are the biggies. So we're talking about what they have. Why do they have power and influence, and why are they important? In other words, it's nice that they have all the sporting impact, but why does it matter that they have power and influence? What can they do? How does it tie back to sports and politics? And certainly we'll look at many examples of what goes on when the countries sort of decide to tie themselves to a sporting event. But essentially, they have something that people want. And when we're talking about people, it's a wide range of people. So both the IOC and FIFA have high profiles with the average citizen. That doesn't mean everybody, right? There's lots of people who are not sports fans at all. But you're talking about where do you get the most number of people interested in the same thing at the same time. And a lot of times, and that turns to sports. So there's citizens, voters and consumers. So the consumers meaning they can, they're going to vote with their pocketbook, but also they can vote with their vote. And so you can link somehow to them or have influence in a democracy where if you anger enough people, then you lose an election. So you actually have this situation where FIFA and the IOC can interact with citizens indirectly and get them to act towards their governments. We'll look at some positive and negative examples of that as we go along. There's also governments, corporations, broadcasters, and the IS themselves. Because the IOC and FIFA are powerful and have this interest from these other people, these other interests, they can leverage a lot of that to get even more power and influence. So they have something that people want. Lots of people on a very broad range of stages of life, of economic and social levels, right? Different classes, different creeds, colors, nationalities, etc. They have these links back to these two. So they have more power and influence than most. So what they have then, in terms of, they have that power and influence, but they leverage them in two different major ways. So the first is through events, and that would be both hosting and participating. And this is a picture of Vanuatu marching in the opening ceremonies several years ago. Vanuatu is an island nation state that most Americans haven't heard of. The chance for most Americans to hear them would have come if they were watching a season of Survivor that was shot in Vanuatu. But other than that, it doesn't come up on the scene very often. So one of the things that Vanuatu is interested in is having a field, a place where they will be recognized and acknowledged as a member of the global community by more than just, say, diplomats. So sure, they're at the United Nations, and that's important. It gives them a voice. And yes, they're in something called the Pacific Islands Forum. It's another IGO, and that's important. They have a voice. But for you and I and the majority of people in the world to say, oh, there's a Vanuatu, then the Parade of Nations in the Olympics is really important. So they have that, right? The IOC has that. They also have the ability to award hosts. Hosts for different games is an opportunity for the IOC to sort of control something that a lot of countries want, and it gives the IOC and FIFA lots of influence. So with FIFA, they don't just have the World Cup, the Men's World Cup, right? They have the Women's World Cup. Then they have the Under-21 World Cups, the Under-17 World Cups, men's and women's both. They have these tournaments that are going on all the time. And there are smaller states than, say, China and the United States interested in hosting, and they get a chance to host if FIFA acknowledges them and their sort of worthiness to host one of these smaller tournaments. So they have the events. Then they also have the sports. You might say, on the one hand, then that the governments and themselves, individual national governments, are almost as interested in the events as they are in the sports. Right? So they have the events which interest governments. They interest me too, right? I'm very interested in the Olympics and I'm interested in the World Cup. But what interests a lot of the individuals, the citizens in a country, are more the sports themselves. Not the event of the World Cup or the Olympic Games, but the sporting competition. So that could be soccer, it could be track, it could be skating, it could be equestrian, it could be archery, it could be almost anything you want. So they have them, and they have them packaged in ways that matter. So with FIFA and the World Cup, it's the sporting event, it's the soccer that might matter most. We'll talk about that a little bit in the next unit, the difference between event-based sports interest and the interest in the sport itself. Right, so this other picture that's here on the right, this is Kip Keino. He's a famous Kenyan athlete, someone who I was one of the first people I learned about to really develop a respect for and what they did beyond the sporting realm. He won gold medals in both the 1968 Mexico City Games and the 1972 Munich Games, and was a fellow who matters. And so with track and field, right, in the Olympics, there's a certain number of track and field fans, but there's more fans of the event, right? The Olympics themselves. It's why ratings for, in the United States, for example, television ratings for ice skating go through the roof and gymnastics go through the roof when you have an Olympic broadcast. But when you broadcast the national championships or other sort of events, they're not quite as strong, right? There's not as much interest in skating as there is skating in the Olympics, or track and field in the Olympics versus a different track and field event. It doesn't mean no one cares, but the number's different. So FIFA and the IOC have events, and FIFA and the IOC have sports, and they interest different groups of people differently, but they have those, and they control those to great benefit for themselves. Benefit for others too, but really benefit for themselves. Who are they? So if you talk about FIFA or you talk about the IOC, who are you talking about? It's a little confusing because all IFs, to my knowledge, use the word member states. So member states are the people who participate and who are the body, who belongs to them. The exception is the IOC. And as I said it earlier, they're a sporting bingo, but they're not really an IF because they oversee all the different IFs, right? So a member state in the context of FIFA or the context of FINA or FIBA, that's a country whose association, their local sports federation, is affiliated with the international federation that way. So FUFA, this is the Federation of Uganda, their football association, and they're one of the member states of FIFA. A member in the IOC is an individual. So this bottom picture here on the left is a group of the 105 or so IOC members, and they have lots of ability to affect the direction of the organization and things they'll do. So you have member states in FIFA, and you have NOCs, National Olympic Committees, in the Olympic Games. So this is the United Arab Emirates symbol, and their NOC. FIFA has something called an executive committee, 24 individuals who get to decide on all sorts of things. And both these organizations have sort of differing times when the member states / NOCs decide on certain things and when the executive committee or the members decide on certain things. And when you devolve the power to this handful of people, then there's more and more ability to abuse things. So there's opportunities for abuse are rampant. Sometimes you'd say the most common ones would come in when you're naming a host, and that's a little bit confusing, right? So when you're naming a host, you might say, well, there's a direct opportunity to bribe someone or to get influence to have an IOC member or a FIFA executive committee member to vote for your bid. But there's also opportunities on the back end. So if I vote for a place to host that has very little infrastructure, then there's going to be all kinds of ways to get kickbacks from construction companies and others who are trying to build, to get contracts to build. There's also then individuals who are on those organizations, such as the executive committee, who can, if they represent a larger constituency, when the other group's going to vote, they can sell their influence to the highest bidder. And I'm going to have you read an article about Jack Warner, who's a Trinidadian from Trinidad and Tobago, who was the head of CONCACAF for many years. He was on FIFA's executive committee, and he was involved in all kinds of shenanigans. He's not alone. He's one of the people who've been indicted recently. Now, keep in mind, right, if we go back to that of the lecture, these IGOs these sporting bingos are going to say over and over again, they're apolitical, they're not involved in politics. So this sort of protest where they've named the host as Qatar, there's all kinds of problems in Qatar, which we'll look at later, about human rights abuses and workers' rights violations, and hundreds of people dead in building the stadia so far, that they'd say, well, that's a political question and we're outside of that. And so you can have an apolitical political thing that is an opportunity for abuse too. Now, there is some pushing back, and some of that has come from the Swiss officials. Some of it has come from the United States Department of Justice, particularly Attorney General Loretta Lynch. You've seen now at the different sporting events people waving these giant cardboard cutouts of players' faces and heads and stuff. This is epic because this is at a USA-Guatemala soccer game in Nashville in the summer of 2015, and instead of having their cutout of Clint Dempsey or one of the other U.S. soccer stars, they've got Loretta Lynch. And I think that's one of the most brilliant indications of the role that people around the world feel that about Loretta Lynch and the U.S. Department of Justice doing some work at trying to clean up FIFA. The other sorts of thing where you're pushing back, you could say that in the Olympics, at least in naming hosts, that you have a lot less bribery and graft and corruption involved ever since the Salt Lake Olympic scandal happened. We'll look at that later on. But there's this pushing back. But the reality is that that they still, we can go way back up to this slide. Don't get sick as we scroll real fast. They still got this, right? They've got events and they've got the sport. And as long as they have that, then it doesn't matter how much you push back. There's still going to be these other opportunities unless there's some true desire to change. And I haven't seen that yet, but we'll see how it develops. If you'd like to see more, read more about the FIFA scandal that's ongoing, or about IOC, I can send you some links. What I don't want to do is overwhelm you early in the course with the specifics of too much. Read the Warner article, watch this bit from John Oliver and Last Week Tonight. They're really, really good at what they do, and very funny ways that they take down some very serious topics. FIFA and the IOC, they're the of all bingos, right? Sporting bingos, and they've got a lot to do in this world, and they matter to a lot of people. So it's a story that is bigger than sports, and it's one that'll be on our radar for years to come.